2:37 a.m., a motion sensor in aisle 47 lit up red, and the camera feed went dead for exactly 62 seconds. I still remember the timestamp because you learn to live by timestamps when your job is to watch what the rest of the world has already decided to stop looking at. My name is Brian Sullivan. I work nights at a warehouse just off State Route 62 outside Evansville, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. You clock in, swipe 3 checkpoint tags on your loop, check the feeds every 20 minutes, and if something actually happens, you make a note in the log and call maintenance. It pays better than most of the other options I had, and between the night differential and the overtime, it keeps the lights on at my place. That's why I keep doing it, simple as that. Not heroics, not curiosity. Bills and gas money. The building is stupidly big, 40-foot ceilings, rows and rows of racks that look like city blocks when the lights go out, 24 docks facing a parking lot that swallows sound. It's the kind of place the fluorescent fixtures were designed to ruin your eyes with. Everything's a slightly wrong shade of ugly. During the day, it's forklifts and 1,000 small conversations. At night, it's a low ventilation hum and the map of the place on my tablet. The company likes their black-wrapped crates. They come in sizes that used to belong in sci-fi movies. Boxes wrapped in tar-black plastic with no labels, no barcodes. Just a white stripe here and there, and a cardinal number stamped on a corner. They sit in the dark like furniture you didn't own. Early on, the nights were the nights all security guards talk about on their first week. Quiet, long, and good for catching up on sleep in the office chair. You get good at recognizing what sounds mean. The hum of the HVAC, the little rat-a-tat of a shrink-wrap machine in returns, the clunk when a pallet loader makes the wrong turn. Those are the sounds that let you relax for a minute. Anything outside that list frays you. The first odd thing I noticed wasn't spectacular. It was a crate that had moved. I'd do a patrol at 1:05 a.m., stop in checkpoint 12 and scan the tag, walk down aisle 47, and count the racks. At 1:05, the black crate in bay 47C would be against the west rack. At 2:05, it had slid maybe 2 feet onto the next pallet. No cameras showing movement, no forklift logs. It was small enough to be explained by a bad pallet or a hiccup in inventory. Except every week it moved a little, as if someone had nudged it closer to the gap between the racks. You tell yourself the warehouse has its quirks. Still, when that motion sensor lit up at 2:37 and my tablet, camera 47B, stuttered and then froze, I did the thing you do without thinking. I grabbed my flashlight, clipped the flashlight to the belt where it would be there when the quiet tried to lie to you, and walked toward aisle 47. Walking through the racks at night feels like moving down a canyon. Your flashlight's a narrow tooth of daylight in a world that remembers it was dark long before you were born. The sound changes. The hum seems to come from different angles. I remember the metal creak of my boots on concrete more than anything. There's this big, enormous silence that's not absence. It's a thing that holds sound and releases it on its own terms. Camera 47B had shown a vertical shape. Not wide, not human, not rounded like a person, but tall enough to drag past the sprinkler line. The feed caught it from the side, darker than the tarp around the crate. A line that was more like a shadow, stacked so heavy the pixels tried to rearrange themselves and failed. The recording buffer on the tablet ran to the event mark, then skipped. When I pulled the clip up in the office later, I had 1 full minute where the feed simply returned with a different angle, and the system logged, recording interruption buffer reset, 0237 4202 3844. When I got to aisle 47, the smell hit me first. An odd, rubbery scent that wasn't exactly rotten and wasn't exactly chemical. It pooled in the air near the floor and fell cold to my ankles. There was a scrape mark on tile 4712, parallel to the rack, like someone had drug a long, blunt edge across the pallet deck. One pallet was cracked in the middle. The floor under it had a streak of dark residue that looked almost like oil, but when I touched it with a gloved finger, it had a slightly tacky give to it, enough to leave a smear across my glove and make me toss it in my pocket to examine later. The rack was taller than my flashlight beam wanted to reach. I swept the light up and when it landed on the ceiling I could just make out the sprinkler line and the dust suspended beneath it. There was no vertical shape. Whatever the camera had shown, whatever had tripped the motion sensor, wasn't there anymore. I walked the whole length of the aisle. I checked both sides. I ran my tag over the scanner, clicked a few photos with the phone camera as documentation, and wrote, "Scrape mark, pallet crack. Residue present. Camera 47B clip missing 62 seconds. Buffer reset logged." I subbed the report to maintenance and circled safety in the priority box, because that's what you write when you need someone else to make the problem disappear. The supervisor's response was practical. Maintenance to check pallet stability and camera. Shift a cam to a new angle if you think it helps. The camera was, for a few nights, given a different vantage, moved behind a stack of those industrial fans they use to dry paint. They put a bright yellow caution cone at the mouth of aisle 47 for a day, like it was a wet floor in a grocery store. A guy from facilities came out, tapped his phone, did a couple of things I didn't understand to a handheld that chirped, and put a sticker on the monitor. Motor serviced, camera angle adjusted. He didn't look at me like he expected an explanation. I stopped walking down that aisle after that. I don't mean I avoided it for a night or two, it's just I started designing the loop in my head so that at 2:30-ish I had an excuse to be 5 aisles over. You do what you can to minimize your exposure, and you learn the mental calculus of how much truth you can write down. When something doesn't show up on the footage, you learn to weigh the footage higher than your eyes. Cameras are evidence. Cameras are defense. But the cameras also have holes. That is just a fact. You get used to the small compromises. The work itself keeps you honest. You clock in, you sign the patrol sheet, you scan the checkpoint tags that beep when you touch them. There are procedures written down in a binder with a laminated cover that smells like coffee. The binder is the first contract you sign with the place at night. Notice, document, don't touch. I kept with that. Mostly. You have to. Otherwise, you don't eat. If this kind of story is your thing, subscribe. One click keeps me doing this weird night shift. Saying that out loud on camera or a mic is cheap. The truth is boring. The subscription button doesn't stop the things that live in the gaps. It just makes it easier for me to keep coming back with new notes. After the aisle 47 thing, nights changed tone. Not loud, not cinematic. Shifted. The noises I ignored before started to carry a measure of intent. You learn to parse a new layer of sound like a radar. Not the clink of a pallet, but the weight of a thing pressing gently against metal from underneath. Not the whine of a motor, but the way a door gives when something pushes under it. Which brings me to Dock 6. Dock 6 sits on the east side, right where the loading bay has that one long seam in the concrete. The doors there are old. They have a central motor and a manual emergency drop, and a plate by the bottom that will shutter if anything rides against it. There's a little sign that says, "Do not stand beneath the door while operation in progress." The sort of sign that means people got hurt once, and then someone painted a warning and called it fixed. It was 3:11 a.m. when the sensor there lit up. The tablet showed the door frame bowing at the bottom, like something was pushing up from the inside. Not opening all the way, just a lip, maybe a foot of concrete line where the rubber seal bent outward. My feed had the same damn log entry as before. Recording interruption buffer reset, 031107031209. The audio cut out, which is the worst part, because when you lose audio, you lose the smallest clues. Breath, a scuff, a wheeze. Video cuts mean something moved. Audio cuts mean you've just had permission to be uncertain. I walked the dock in under a minute. You train yourself to move fast on an alarm because hesitation is where mistakes get made. The smell at Dock 6 was different, metallic, like pennies and wet cardboard mixed together. The seam beneath the door had a glossy streak along the concrete, as if something had been trapped and then peeled away. There was a white stripe of reflective tape caught under the lip. My flashlight showed the stripe trembling like a tongue that had just been yanked back. When whatever it was pushed, it wasn't a sudden burst. The door bowed upward as if something broad and slow had rolled under it, felt out the seam, and then retracted. The motor whined when the door tried to raise, a sound that made the vibration hum up through my soles. I hit the emergency drop switch because that's what you do when a live door is acting like it's alive. The motor fought. The sound was high and wrong. When the door came down, it landed on something soft enough to leave an imprint, then cleared. There were gouge marks on the lower frame, long, serrated lines, as if someone had taken a blunt screwdriver down the metal and pulled. Dark streaks clung to the edge like someone had wiped their hands there. Again, no obvious origin, no inventory log changing, no forklift recorded in the lane. The camera angle altered in the report the next morning. Facilities put a sticker on the door motor. Motor serviced and calibration performed. 03-12-0830. The sticker smelled faintly of motor oil and the shellac they used to glue it on. After that night, I made a rule in my head. Don't stand in front of the doors between 3 and 4 a.m. The loop route changed. You can't make a rule like that in the binder and have anyone sign it, but you can do the work of reordering your rounds so the place is quieter when those things tend to happen. People call it superstition. I call it survival. A couple days after the Dock 6 event, a forklift operator, Marty, he's older and has a scar across his eyebrow from a bad day a decade ago, said to me in passing, "Those doors are temperamental. Caught a raccoon once." He said it like people say dog when they really mean wolf. He didn't ask me if I saw anything. He knew there was no point. Everybody knows at some level, and most people decide they prefer that level. The day crew kept nodding, kept their morning coffee, kept their playlists. The only things that changed were the angles of cameras and the phrasing in the log. You learn to keep 2 records, the one the binder will accept and the one you keep in your head to orient yourself with at 3 a.m. The binder wants maintenance notified, motor serviced. Your brain keeps door bowed up like something breathed under it. Both are true. The incidents grew in a pattern you could almost calendar. The 3-4 a.m. window became a phrase in my head. It felt like a time the building had reserved for its own work. It wasn't always violent. Sometimes it was just shifting, pallets arranged with obscene precision, crates moved to make a line every 4 feet. Sometimes it was worse, which is how I ended up taking a call on a motion alert in a part of the building I wasn't supposed to go into. There are stairwells and sublevels in every warehouse. They're usually locked because downstairs is where the returns and RMA stuff gets triaged, and the company doesn't want night folks poking around there unless it's scheduled. We have badge access for a reason. The day crew has its own people with fast hands. On a Wednesday, I heard something weird on the North Corridor cameras. Again, the audio cut, but there was a fuzzed-up motion in the frame near stairwell C3. The alert pinged the tablet twice in succession, like whatever was there was patient but measured. The feed was glitchy. I debated my badge access for all of 5 seconds before my hand slid the badge across. Call it curiosity. Call it the same instinct that makes you check a smoke alarm. Call it boredom, and the part of you that thinks the rules are suggestions. The stairwell wasn't on my normal loop. It had a door with a keypad that usually reads, "Access, staff only." And today, for reasons I can't justify, it let me in. My badge logged, "Access granted 10413. I came down into the stairwell and it smelled of cardboard and starch. The stairwell is narrow and the light flickers. It feels like being funneled into the guts of the building. At the bottom, a service corridor opens into a room that wasn't there in any of my maps. A long, low-ceilinged space full of folding tables and fluorescent tubes bent to give off that hospital something light. Tape dispensers clacked in a rhythm like a metronome. There were dozens of people at the tables, heads down. They moved in time like a clock. At first, I assumed it was a temp crew. The company uses agencies sometimes for big pushes, but these people, if that's the right word, didn't look like temp workers. They were too still. They had hands that moved with a mechanical calm, and when they were done doing whatever they were doing, their heads turned in unison toward me. It was the kind of coordinated movement that a fire drill never teaches you about because you never see it in any manual. There was no noise except for the sticky clack of tape and the soft whisper of fingers closing a box. Their faces weren't empty so much as drained, like someone had turned the color down gently. When the fluorescent light picked them up, Their eyes caught it in a way that didn't reflect so much as absorb. One of them looked straight at me and the eyelids moved slow and methodical. I said, "Hey," because that's what you do to see if a person is okay. The sound was lost in the hum of the fluorescent ballasts. The fingers kept moving. Then a head turned. It didn't turn the way a startled head turns. It rotated with a tiny, clean precision as if the neck were following a preset. The eyes were glassy and wide in a way that made me step backward. For a moment I thought the fluorescent light had gone out, and I was staring at mannequins. For a moment longer, I thought I might have just walked into an after-hours training. That moment stretched. I didn't stay. I backed up, keeping the path behind me clear, and when I reached the stairway I heard another sound from below. It was the kind of soft, sustained sound you get when 1,000 cardboard pieces are dragged in time with one another. It was not human laughter. It wasn't music. It was a wash of movement that reminded me of a printing press. When I reached the top of the stairs, I swiped my badge out of habit and looked at the log. My badge said, "Access denied for stairwell C3 at 01:06:27. I hadn't left until after 01:06. It's a small administrative corruption in the system, but I knew enough to keep 2 copies of the night. I wrote a note in the night binder. Unauthorized activity in sub-level, RMA area, maintenance, security to check. I left my flashlight on the stairwell railing, because leaving something small behind seems like you're making a story for someone else to pick up, and I didn't want anyone else to get curious and go down. The next week, the stairwell door had a new deadbolt. My badge read, "Access restricted." The maintenance guy that installed it, Tom, who has been with the company since before any of us, didn't meet my eyes when I asked why. He said, "Manager's orders, safety protocol. You get similar platitudes in factories when they want a problem to be boxed into an absence of conversation." He handed me a new route sheet that had the sub-level stairwells crossed off in red pen. The words were clinical: restricted after-hours access. You could feel the language making a wall for whatever was below. For a few nights after that, I would stand at checkpoint 3 and listen for the sound of the tape dispensers. I could hear nothing. Sometimes I could hear the building clear its throat, one long intake of its HVAC. Sometimes at 3 a.m., there would be a faint pattern of stamping that didn't align with any machinery I knew. The patterns started to arrange themselves in my head like a calendar. I began to think in windows: 2:30, 2:40, quick, 3:10, 3:20, deep pressure, 3:45, 3:55, movement. The times became a rough map that let me guess where not to be. There's a strange thing that happens when the abnormal starts to sit in the same chairs the ordinary once did. You get used to it. Not comfortable, used to it. You rearrange your life and your route sheet so that the holes line up in a way that keeps you safe. You also stop telling people the whole truth. For the binder, you say, maintenance notified and camera serviced. For yourself, you keep the count of gaps. How long the feed went out, what shapes the camera shows in the corner, the smell of the dock when it bows. This is where most of the stories end, with some sense that the narrator either fought back or saved the day. Mine doesn't. There was no fight because there was no place to start one that wasn't either suicidal or absurd. There was, instead, a sequence of adjustments. Aisle 47 was blocked during certain hours. Dock 6 had a motor check. The stairwell was locked. These were, in their own way, the building's way of covering its tracks. More practicality than conspiracy, but with the same effect. Things continued to happen. The room under stairwell C3 still sits in my head like a half-remembered technical drawing. I'm not the kind of person who goes back to the scene on purpose. I write the logs. I do my rounds. At night, when the months stretch and the weather cools and the humidity folds into the concrete, the building tells the same little stories and expects me to read them and move on. Sometimes, though, a thing says a word. I didn't expect words in boxes. I didn't expect sentences to crawl across cardboard. That was next, and it was one of the reasons I started thinking less about movement and more about voice. But that's where this gets messy, because voice changes the contract. A motion you can dismiss, a voice you can't. The boxes were supposed to be inanimate. They are not complicated. They are supposed to be an inventory. There are people who will tell you they saw the giants on their first night, or that they saw the talking box, and then the sky went gray. That's not how it happened for me. It happened like slow math does. You add a bit, subtract a bit, and suddenly you have a number you don't recognize. The talking box sits in that addition. The giants sit later. For now, after the stairwell and the dock and the aisle, the building seems to be testing us for a tolerance threshold. And the threshold, in my case, was the sound of tape. That night, when I heard the voice, I was restocking RMA Hold. It was late and my feet were aching, and I was thinking about the coffee I would owe myself in the morning. The camera in returns had been a little grainy all week. The IR bloom around a package looked like a halo in the frame. I had one palette left when the box spoke. It wasn't a booming voice. It wasn't English at first, more like a cloth scraping across the side of a throat. Then, when my head turned, it said softly and exactly, "Open me." I froze because that's what everyone does first. The brain does the reflexive math. Is this recorded? Is this loggable? Can I be paid to do this? The box was sealed. It had RMA stickers and a barcode. It had no return reason written on it. On camera, later, nothing in the top of the box moved. On my end, the corner where the voice came from bulged as if something below had pressed its palm against the inside of the cardboard. The bulge receded and this little voice, the voice of someone trying not to be noticed, said open like a polite request. There are rules in the binder. No opening unlabeled returns after hours. No answering a voice in a sealed container. You get told a million ways that hands and curiosity make a bad night worse. I set the palette down and I walked away. I didn't write a report at the time because who do you report this to? Today at 02:12 a.m., sealed RMA box asked me to open it. It sounds insane even when you're trying. Back in the office, I listened to the feed on the archive 3 times. The top of the box was clean on camera. No bulge. For the life of me, I couldn't reconcile my mouth saying aloud that it had pleaded with me with the footage that looked like someone slipping a padded envelope into a drop. The system showed no inventory movement for that item. In the morning, the pallet had been moved to the far end of returns and eventually marked as dispositioned, with a note that said, "No visual defects." A line manager crossed it out in a spreadsheet later. I didn't open it. I still don't know if I did the right thing. The thing about the nights is you keep making small bets. You bet you won't get curious enough to get hurt. You bet they won't notice your presence. You bet that the cameras will be the truth. Those bets keep your bank account healthy and your conscience manageable. But the boxes talk. The boxes don't always sound like boxes. Sometimes they sound like the last syllable of a laugh someone swallowed. Sometimes they whisper what they want. Most of the time they whisper requests that are disciplined. Open me, move me, put me back. They have a rhythm. They have a patience. They wait. After that night, I started carrying a pen with me at all times, the cheap kind with a cap that clicks. I wrote things down in a small notebook rather than in the binder right away. The binder expects certain language. The notebook doesn't care. In the notebook, I wrote the times, the sensory things, the smell of cardboard, the way the tape sound layered like rain on tin, the tack of residue on a glove. I wrote once a line I couldn't bring myself to read back. If the boxes can speak, what else is reporting noise to us? I folded the page over and kept walking. That brings us to where I can't decide whether I'm being paranoid or reasonable. The routine deepens, and the price of attention goes up. I start to notice patterns I wish I didn't see. The way the black-wrapped crates end up where the day crew requires them to be by 8 a.m. Untidy as a sidewalk sweep. The way my priority list gets rearranged. The way the supervisor's email slips into my inbox with a new extra 5% in pay and a bullet point. Reassignment of certain routes for overnight safety. Institutional solutions. Little pragmatic adjustments. They don't ask for the story, they ask for the compliance. There are things I haven't told anyone in a log because writing them down felt like signing a confession. I haven't told you everything either. I'm telling you enough to allow you to picture what it's like to work against a building that will not stop arranging itself into things that don't belong in normal places. I'm telling you how the night starts ordinary and ends like someone rearranged the world while you were stapling returns. I'm telling you, the checklist is both a shield and a surrender. When I walked back onto the floor that next night, I kept my head down and my flashlight closer to my boots. The vents hummed like a choir in low. The clock over the loading bay blinked 0256 in cold green numerals. I paused at the office door and listened to the building breathe, to the way the ducks settled into a frequency you'd swear was a word if you were trying to make a bedtime story out of it. I had a list of rules by then. Don't block a path. Don't open sealed returns after hours. Don't stand under an active door at 3 a.m. Don't go where your badge won't keep you alive. Keep the log honest and the rest of the truth private. That night, one of those rules led me to a door I hadn't planned on opening. The motion light in the far cage flickered, and the camera buffer put a hole in the hour between 0338 and 0339. I told myself I was doing my job. I told myself the binder expects me to verify. I told myself a lot of things. The truth is, I was there because what you do when you really don't want to be seen is you become very good at being unseen. The stairwell door, stairwell D, opposite Dock 6, had a little brass tag on it that said Area, Materials Handling Storage. The camera across the landing showed a shadow move in the lower right corner, and then nothing, like a picture someone had smudged. The tablet logged. Recording interruption buffer reset 0338, 12, 0339, 10. I swiped my badge. Access denied. The keypad blinked red. For a second I stood there, thinking about how much trouble you can get in for propping an access door. I thought about all the small compromises and how they added up. Then I tightened my pack, slid a bobby pin from behind my ear into the latch because desperation is a craftsman's friend, and I pushed. It gave quiet as a breath, and the gap let in a smell that made the back of my throat tighten. There was the sound of legs moving with a careful rhythm, like a conveyor of limbs. The floor below had a different pitch to it. The ducts changed resonance. My flashlight beam found a long table, and then at the far edge of the light, a line of boots that were too heavy for the soles they carried. I was about to take another step when the light cut out, as if someone had taken a sleeve and pulled it over the world. The motion sensor at the top of the stair rocked, and the camera feed blanked. For the first time since I started keeping time by the building, I understood the particular terror of being in a place that decides to hide itself. I held my breath not because I thought silence would hide me, but because the act of breathing felt like an announcement. I could hear the faint clack of cardboard, like a heart trying to find the right beat, and then, from somewhere under the workbenches, the soft sound of a chair scraping. I stepped fully into the doorframe and the narrative folded in on itself. The fluorescent light hummed on a lower frequency, and the room showed itself as if someone had pulled laundry lines taut. Tables, tape dispensers, rows of what looked like people working. One head rose and its eyes found mine. There was no expression to the face, only the thin, deliberate recognition of something that had known this place longer than I had. I told myself to retreat. I told myself to leave the badge swiped as a proof I had been there. Do the checklist. Go back to the office. Write down the facts that care to be recorded. But before I turned, before I ran, before I did any of those rational things, one of the figures at the table, lifted a hand and pointed a single finger toward my chest. I don't have a story about heroics. I don't have one about courage. What I have is the sound my own heartbeat made in that room, the way that finger looked like it meant something besides a direction, and the way my feet let me out of the stairwell without argument. I stepped back out into the stairwell. My flashlight skittered across the concrete and landed on the safety sign, then on the keypad. My badge still said access denied. The camera in the corridor logged 033812 033910. Recording interruption buffer reset. When I closed the door behind me, the building exhaled. The hum yawned out through the vents and the fluorescent light steadied. I could have written it in the binder, or I could have gone home and told my wife I was tired. I did both things in different ways. I wrote a terse note in the log, and I made a dinner that I couldn't taste while thinking of the way the finger had pointed. I tell you this not to gawk and not to get sympathy. I tell you because there is a peculiar honesty that comes from living through things the daylight denies. There is also a practical honesty. After the stairwell, my badge had fewer privileges, and my paycheck had a new number added to it. The supervisor didn't ask why I looked tired. The supervisor asked for a signed acknowledgement of the new route change, and then added, in a neat corporate font, an increase in compensation for the increased responsibility of overnight coverage. People will look at that and call it a payoff. They'd be half right. It is a payoff, and it is an agreement. Ignore us, do the work, get paid. We will not ask you to clean the blood from a floor. We will ask you to be quiet about it. We will change your route and call it safety. We will put a sticker on a motor and call it done. On the other hand, there are things that don't respect stickers. There are things that show up between 3:15 and 4:15 a.m. with a soft competence that looks a lot like work. They carry crates in a way that suggests they've practiced for centuries, and they leave the day crew none the wiser. Only a stack of black-wrapped boxes perfectly aligned as if someone had an eye for geometry and no idea about paperwork. I should have stopped writing after the stairwell. The sensible narrative ends there with me agreeing to stay put, to keep my head down, to let the building do what it needs to do. But the nights have other plans. The boxes talk, the doors breathe, the stairwells hold secrets that make sense only in the dark. The next thing that happens is the kind of thing that takes away your ability to pretend the building is only a building. I was in the office doing the logs, typing precise, dry sentences that the binder would accept, when the feed for warehouse main flicked. The time read 03:42:58. On the monitor, the biggest crates in the far lane, a handful of black-wrapped volumes the size of cars, seemed to realign themselves. The camera jittered, the frame slipped, and then the tape recorded a different angle entirely. The system logged it with obedient formality. Recording interruption buffer reset, 03:42:58, 03:44:07. When I walked the lane later, the ground had a chain of footprints that were too broad for any human boot. They were set apart in equal distances, like a blueprint for a stride. The black plastic on several crates had been rearranged to reveal an opening no inventory tag declared. And in the dust around the crates there were drops of something that had a smell like wet iron, but wasn't blood the way you read in a lab report. It was a smudge of something that suggested an animal had been there, and someone else had been careful to make sure no one could say which animal. I didn't stand and watch them move this time. I didn't have to. The building does these things mostly with its own machinery. The things inside, if they can be called things, move heavy objects, as if they have the patience to do it perfectly. There is a practicality to their labor that makes you think of them as workers in their own right. It sounds ridiculous to say it, but I began to catalog their habits like a foreman would. They work between 3 sasta and 4 sasti. They make no mistakes. They leave little traces that a camera will hide. They do not look at the cameras. Started wondering who owns that labor. Not in a political sense, don't make me moralize, but in the practical ledger sense. Who signed the manifest that placed that crate where it needs to be? Who checked it in? The ledger has a lot of blank lines in the time after 3 a.m. The ledger has a lot of stickers that say, service done. The ledger closes the loop by telling you maintenance checked the motor and the cameras were adjusted. The ledger doesn't tell you what they did to do the job, and in that silence the building makes its own arrangements. I kept the logbooks honest in the way the binder likes. In the notebook I kept the ugly details, the footprints, the tape, the smell. I will tell you this as plainly as I can. When you put together the small facts, they become a kind of architecture. The footprints led away into the freight lane, and around the pillars, and then dissolved where the light softened. They didn't end like a human one might. They blurred into a smear like a piece of charcoal dragged over concrete. At 04:00, the day crew started arriving with their coffee. The place smelled like regular life again. The black-wrapped crates were arranged with a precision that would make an OCD person proud. No one mentioned the footprints. The log said, crate realigned by crew. By crew, the note said, which is corporate shorthand for everything appears normal by morning. The spreadsheets closed their rows and the morning huddle swapped stories about coffee and traffic. No one mentioned the footprints. No one mentioned the smear. The ledger is very neat about outcomes and very quiet about method. I could have left the story there and kept my neat little compromises. But that same night, something else happened that made every practical decision I'd made up to then feel like a rehearsal. It was late. The office was the only room with light in the west side of the building. My tablet glowed and the calendar on the wall clicked over to 0342. I had just typed the tidy phrase, "Crate realigned by crew. No safety issues observed," when camera 12 in freight lane 4 blinked, and then the screen went ugly with static. The log read, "Recording interruption buffer reset. 0342 58 03 4407. When the feed returned, it wasn't the same angle. The pantry of pixels had been cropped like someone had shifted the lens cloth. The lane looked different, deeper somehow. The black-wrapped crates that had been locked against the east pillar had moved into an impossible arrangement, stacked into a pattern that made the aisle feel narrower. Dust lay in a chain of prints that had a spacing too wide for any man or woman who had ever worked a forklift. The prints were parallel arcs the width of 2 pallets, set apart like the footfall of something with a very long stride. I told myself it could be an equipment shift, maybe a crane shift, maybe a contractor with a bigger rig. But the contractor checklists were clear in the binder. Any outside crew is logged and supervised. There was no contractor log. There was no forklift activity recorded. The motion sensor attached to camera 12 had tripped at 034319. The feed had a ripple of static and then a brief tilt, enough to suggest the camera had been nudged, not by wind, but by something large. I walked freight lane 4 with the lights low, the flashlight on my palm like a coin of privilege in the dark. The air smelled cold and metallic, like a machine that had been running for years and finally permitted the smell to escape. The floor was stamped in arcs. They led past the pillars and into the shadow under Dock 7. And then they simply stopped in a smear of dust, as if whatever made them had pressed its foot there and then lifted it on nothing. I rounded a stack of crates and paused. It was an old reflex. Don't be seen before you understand what sees you. The hum of the HVAC lowered, the fluorescence over Dock 7 stuttered, and the camera on the far pillar skittered with a thin vertical tear of light. Then I heard the sound, heavy but measured. Not a single footfall, but an orchestrated cadence like someone had a metronome under a boot. I ducked behind a pallet rack and the world narrowed to the slice of light my flashlight allowed. The metal rack felt solid against my shoulder. I tried not to breathe too loud because my lungs felt foolish when the place was working with gears of its own. In the thin cone of light I saw them, not shadows, not people, figures that had a human shape stretched and scaled. The first I could see was the shoulder of one. The vest that company people wear, but sewn the wrong way, as if the vest had been scaled up 100% and then tailored by someone with a different idea of proportion. The reflective stripe ran across a chest the size of a TV and caught my flashlight like a wink someone tried to hide. The thing moved with an economy of motion that made work out of the notion of labor. It carried a black-wrapped crate like a man carries an overnight bag, careful, precise, with a practice. Its hands were too big for any glove I had seen. They were big enough to palm a pallet. I saw a badge pinned to its vest, but it was not a badge so much as a rectangle of metal with our company's logo stamped small, like a child's toy badge stuck on a giant's chest. They wore helmets shaped like industry hard hats, but scaled and oval, and when one turned its head, the helmet didn't fit so much as sit like a crown. The neck muscles had a ropey tension to them, like something wound instead of built. They moved in pairs, 2 lengths apart, and the air around them vibrated as if the building itself were adjusting to their mass. There was a shape ahead, taller than the others by a lot. It had a shadow that ran up to the sprinkler line and left the fixtures swinging. It lifted a crate with one arm as if the crate were a folded shirt. The crate placed itself onto a pallet with a crispness that felt ceremonial. There was no speech, no yelling, no music. Only the metallic breath of their footfalls and the subtle rasp of tar plastic against plastic. I remember thinking, with annoyed clarity, that they were very good at this. Not monstrous in a scream way, but monstrous in an efficient way. They did the job that needed doing with the dispassion of a machine that had been softened into habit. As they worked, they left a narrow trail of smudges, dark streaks along the bottom edges of the crates, a sort of residue on the straps, an occasional drop on the concrete that smelled sharp and metallic. When I squinted, it looked like someone had dragged a mouth along a seam and left a fine, dark abrasion. It was the weirdest labor I'd ever seen, and the most pedestrian. They didn't look at the cameras. They didn't look at me. They were being watched by nothing that recorded them in a way that mattered. They were, famously, not listed on any payroll. And yet here they were, wearing the outward signs of the company and hauling what the day crew would later call a mislabeled heavy manifest. One of the giants paused and adjusted the crate it carried. A long, dark streak seeped from the bottom edge like oil pressed from a seam. It didn't drip like blood. It stained like something that had been pressed and then allowed to relax. The giant cleaned its palm on the crate before picking it up again. The gesture was small enough not to fit into any story I could tell, and large enough to make me understand that these things, if they're things, had their own small, incomprehensible rituals. I watched until the air felt too full for me to stand in. I learned later that what made that night different from every time before was not that they were there. Things having their own labor had already happened, but that they were close enough for me to see the badges on their vests. They were wearing identification items that, for any HR person, would represent a cause for incident reporting. But there was no reporting in the air, only the quiet movement of hands putting heavy crates into ordered rows. They did it conscientiously, with the stubbornness of an assembly line. At one point, a taller one stooped and looked in the direction of my hiding place. For half a second, I felt the whip of attention, like someone had checked a mailbox with your name on it and found a different slip. The one that looked my way didn't hurry. Its face, if you can call it that, was shaded under the helmet. There was a smear along the cheek, a mark that caught the light with a dull, rust-red gleam. It wasn't gore. It was more like someone had handled a machine that had oil and iron in it. It only made the thing more matter-of-fact. They finished their task and then, with the same methodical slowness, moved on. They stacked the last crate and turned as a unit and walked toward the freight elevator, as if they'd been rehearsing that exit for decades. Their footsteps were low and reassured the building of order. The camera recorded the last of them passing out of frame, and then the feed locked, the way a camera sometimes locks onto a motion and refuses to let go. The log, obedient, wrote it down with the phrase I had come to know. Recording interruption buffer reset, 0343220345-1. By the time I stepped out from behind the rack, the lane looked like the day crew had spent an afternoon tidying. Aligned crates, lines squared off. No sign of the gigantic footprints except a faint disturbance in the dust where the pallet wheels had once rolled through. I flipped the flashlight higher into the light and checked the underside of the crates. The smudges were there, faint as if someone had used a sponge on a blackboard. Nothing in the inventory system had changed. No manifest bore witness. My notebook recorded, giants observed moving heavy crates wearing company vests, smears present, badge-like pieces visible, no payroll correlation. I didn't run to management. Running into management with a line about giants that had badges would land someone in HR faster than you'd blink. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for months. I documented, I logged, and I preserved a sterile version for the binder. Unidentified heavy lift activity observed during overnight hours. Possible contractor, no injuries. Maintenance to inspect crate smears. The supervisor responded the way supervisors always do in these situations, with a mixture of pragmatism and detachment. Noted, he wrote back. Facilities to verify cameras and check dock access. Also, and here was the line that changed the ledger in a practical way. We are increasing overnight differential for the next pay cycle to reflect increased coverage requirements. He added a new bullet point to my duties list. Refrain from accessing Freight Lane 4 between 3:30 and 4:30 a.m. The night crew was given a new route map that gently rerouted the human bodies out of the path the giants preferred. Someone, behind a monitor or over a phone, had decided the easiest way to keep everyone safe was to keep them uninterested and further away. The pay increase came with the route change. The message was clear. We will adjust you around their work. We will not stop their work. It felt frankly like buying someone's silence with a raise. People will call that a bribe. I call it a ledger with extra zeros on one side. You can make whatever moral calculus you want with that. For me, it meant paying rent. For others, it meant sleeping through odd sounds without asking too many questions. The supervisor signed the new route changes with a copy of a maintenance sticker on the report. Cameras repositioned. Motor calibrations complete. 0344, someone's shorthand for a day shift. After that, the relationship between me and the building became more contractual. I performed my duties and the building paid me in benign neglect. The giants continued to do their work in the room and lanes they'd carved out. The basement crew, those motionless packers, kept their rhythm during their own hours. The talking boxes sometimes spoke, sometimes didn't. There was a new sort of rhythm to it, a tempo the place kept like a watch. I told my wife less. That is the human cost of an undramatic horror. It chews up language and leaves you with small, private rituals. When she asked why I came home smelling of motor oil, I told her we had a leaky HVAC, and the crew was bleaching the vents. When she asked why I sometimes shook when I got home, I said it was the coffee. She believed me because it was easier than believing the alternatives, and because she had bills of her own, stacked on the kitchen counter next to the coupon envelopes. You make practical decisions. You make them not because you're a coward and not because you're brave, but because you are tired and you want plates on the table. There is dignity in survival that looks suspiciously like compromise. There is also a quiet shame that sits in the skull when you sign an acknowledgement, and the thing you acknowledged is not what anyone expects when they say the word workplace. One of the strangest things about that period was how normalized the abnormal became in my head. The days all blurred into a set of safety checks and the nights into a calendar of avoidance. I changed where I stood, where I walked, what I photographed. I started to believe in my own bookkeeping, but sometimes the building reminded me that my ledger was provisional. There was a night, late winter, and the concrete had this dry, brittle feel, when the talking box made a sound that wasn't a request. I had come in at 10 p.m., iced a coffee in the break room, and clacked the binder into place. My phone buzzed at 2:07 with an alert. Camera return 3 had motion. The feed was glitchy like it often was when the IR got cold. The top of the palette glowed with that halo the small cameras give off. The log read, "Recording interruption buffer reset, 020736020811." I went to returns because that's where you go when a palette mouths off. Because tape makes noise and someone's job is to find out why a palette is talking. The box that had said, "Open me" before was not there. There was a different box instead. Its top bowed enough that it caught the light oddly. When I walked close, it spoke. Not the polite whisper, but a blank, almost bored notification. It said, in a voice that matched the way a screen gives you a suggestion, "Package assigned. Route confirmed. Do not intervene." It had the cadence of an instruction manual read by a tired clerk. It made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. The absurdity of being told by a box that the correct response was inaction. I left the palette alone, wrote down the time, and went back to the office. The next day, the inventory system showed a status. Dispositioned, no visual defects. Carrier recalls package for return. Carrier recalls happen. They are part of the catalog of excuses we use to reconcile reality to paperwork. The problem is the carrier recall never shows what happened in the hour when the box decided to speak. The system erases the small, messy minutes and leaves a neat annotation. That pattern, an anomaly, happens, the recording has a hole. Facilities stickered a fix and the ledger closed. Kept repeating until it felt less like a conspiracy and more like a business model. The company paid the bills for their part. The building did the work it wanted. The workers, human and otherwise, kept to their lanes. The supervisor's emails thanked me for professional diligence and attached notices about safety and an extra few % on the paycheck, typed like net income and moral padding. At some point I stopped asking myself if I should tell someone outside the building. What would I say? That giants with badges came at night and stacked crates? That sealed boxes asked to be opened and the voices were soft like a hand at your shoulder? The idea of a public report felt theatrical and useless. The honest report, the notebook, the dates, the smears, sat in a drawer, and occasionally I took it out like a man might stroke an old coin. It comforted me because it meant I had not let it all evaporate into tacit knowledge. There is a small economy that emerges in places like that, a social currency made of who knows what and who keeps their mouth shut. Some people I worked with were in on the cost. Marty, the forklift operator, would give me a nod across the lunchroom and not ask how close I'd been to a dock at 311. Tom from maintenance would avoid the stairwell when he had the option. The day crew pretended like ordinary logistics were all that mattered. If you need proof that a community is cooperating in silence, you only have to look at their indifference when the morning stacks are perfect. They accept the miracle and go home. The moral of that arrangement is small and ugly. We all sign the contract of our lives in tiny increments. A job keeps you alive. A raise keeps the worry from the edges. A signed route sheet is a promise that you'll look the other way when the world rearranges itself at night. I accepted my part. I will not pretend I was heroic. I paid my bills. I kept my family secure. And in the quiet hours I learned to recognize when the building was beginning a cycle and when it was simply humming along. Once, toward the end of a long autumn, the morning supervisor, his name is Curtis, a man who keeps his emails shorter than his conversations, asked me to come into his office after my shift. He closed the door like the managers do when they want the conversation to not leak out onto the floor. He had a file in front of him, and a look that said he had been reading too many incident reports and was ready to treat them as administrative problems. "Brian," he said, "we know things happen at night. We can't stop everything. But we need someone reliable. Take it or leave it. We want you to accept a new overnight agreement. Extra pay. No access to certain areas. We'll provide a list. Sign here." He slid a form across the desk. It detailed the adjusted route with the stairwells crossed out in a font that made the red ink sound official. It detailed an increase in night differential that would let me fix a leak in my bathroom without borrowing from my wife's savings. It had a clause about not sharing proprietary operations without HR approval. It had a clause that implicitly asked me to not be the thing that made the company explain the impossible to anyone they didn't have to. I thought of the finger pointing in the stairwell and the giant's badge and the way the boxes asked like polite beggars. I thought of the smell of cardboard and the way the building arranged itself like a thought. I took the pen. The signature was small and private and exactly the sort of thing that locks a man to his own compromises. When I signed, Curtis offered a small, almost embarrassed smile and said, "We'd prefer you not escalate these." He didn't need to say why. Every hour after that had a new structure. I did my rounds. I circled the office in patterns that cleverly kept me distant from lanes at 3 a.m. I followed the binder's language. I spent time polishing the parts of my job that were easily explained. The checkpoint beeps, the log entries, the neat photos. In the dark, the giants moved their heavy things, and the basement packers taped boxes together, and the talking boxes spoke. There are nights when the quiet presses hard, and the only sound is the ventilation system clearing its throat. On those nights, I ask myself how long a person can live inside a ledger of half-truths before it becomes their whole life. The honest answer is, for a long time. Necessity is a patient teacher. The pattern continues in ways that have become predictable. If something's going to happen, it was very likely between 3 and 4. If cameras cut, the tape log will read, "Recording interruption buffer reset," with clinical precision, like a note scrawled in the margin of a book to mark an unreadable page. Maintenance will come by and put a sticker on machinery and call it done. The day crew will show up to neatly stacked crates and a manifest that says, "Rearranged for shipment." I keep a copy of the notebook in a sock drawer at home, and rate it when I need to remind myself of details no one will ask for. Sometimes, late, when the office is empty and the hum is loud, I watch the feeds with my feet up and a coffee gone cold. I watch them not because I'm chasing horror, but because I am tethered by a curious need to know the lines of the place. The cameras lie by omission the way people do, failing to show their subject rather than falsifying it. They have holes, the same way any storyteller does. That hole is where the building hides its habits. I'm not an investigator. I'm not a hero. I am someone who does a job that involves keeping an eye on things others prefer not to see. I choose, in quiet increments, to remain employable. I choose my meals over the thrill of exposing the unknown. That's the most human thing about the whole arrangement. The choices are mundane. The stakes are not. People who listen to this kind of story often want a moral, a payoff, a dramatic reveal. There isn't one here. The closest thing I have to closure is this. If you want to avoid discomfort, keep your distance. If you want to keep your hands clean, sign the route sheet and accept the stickers. If you want the sorts of odd wonders this place offers, you should expect to pay in small concessions. A month after Curtis handed me the form, I received an email with a photo attached. A snapshot of Freight Lane 4 taken at dawn. The black-wrapped crates were in a perfect array. Someone, a day shift manager, had scrawled in a yellow Sharpie across the margin. Good work. The photo had a tiny maintenance sticker pinned to the corner. Cameras checked. No safety issues observed. The world moved on the same rails it had before. If someone ever asks me if I would tell the story in full to authorities, my answer would be practical. What good would it do? They would close the lanes for an inspection. They would bring in a temporary crew that would get nervous and perhaps frightened, and then they would leave, and the giants would wait in their lanes until the building invited them back. The company would print a notice about operational anomalies in the smallest font possible, and then buy a new camera. The ledger would be satisfied, life would be paid for. And so, I keep the route, I keep the notebook, I keep the binder and the pen and the stupid loyalty of a man who prefers a steady paycheck to chaos. The building keeps its hours, the giants keep doing their hours. The boxes continue to speak on occasion, in voices that range from pleading to board instruction. The basement remains locked, and sometimes I can hear the rhythmic slap of tape from above. The stairwells have deadbolts now that sometimes bolt themselves, which is a detail I never quite learned to trust. When people tell you their story, they usually end with a flourish. Not me. My ending is practical, like the rest of the nights. I accepted the pay bump. I accepted the reassigned route. I am writing this from the office because there is power in telling something even if the telling changes nothing. There is a certain peace in being honest about the small compromises you make. So here's the last thing I will say. If you ever find yourself in a building that schedules its own work between 3 and 4 in the morning, if the cameras have holes and the crate fingerprints are too wide for human boots, do not stand under a door at 3:11 a.m. Do not prop an access door open, because curiosity is not a safety protocol. And if a sealed package asks to be opened, the most practical answer is to walk away. They just work. They come and they load and they stack, and in the morning the place is tidy, and everyone pretends nothing out of the ordinary happened. For my part, I like that. It keeps my family fed. It keeps my hands unbloodied. It keeps my nights dangerous only in the quietest of ways. Maybe that's cowardly. Maybe it's survival. Maybe it's simply what a man does when the world offers him a choice between fear and mortgage payments. If someone else wants a hero, consider looking elsewhere. I didn't become one. I became a ledger keeper. I took the raise. I adjusted my route. I bought a better flashlight. And sometimes in the small white hours, I still watch the feeds. I still write the times in my notebook. I still, from time to time, hear a box ask for something in that soft voice, and I still answer it in my head with the same short reply. Not tonight. If you're hearing this as a recording, you should know a couple of practical things. These are my notes. They are not evidence of a case, just the account of someone who kept watching because watching was part of his job. There's a faint possibility the channel presenting this will add a short note, and if they do, then, if you're still interested in hearing more, I suppose you could check the description for a link to some merch and a place where we gather further accounts. But that's not my job to promote. My job is the night shift. My job is to keep the log and the lights and, as much as possible, the quiet. If you want to hear more stories like this, there's a place that collects them and a button that takes you there. For my part, I'll keep coming back because someone has to. The building will keep doing what it does because it is older than any of our opinions about it. They just work. And I like that.